In a world where wealth and status often dictate the value of art, one woman's quiet defiance turned the art world upside down. Teresa Clark, an artist shrouded in anonymity, attended a prestigious auction to witness the sale of her own work, a piece worth millions. Though mocked for her appearance and dismissed by the elite, Teresa's actions that night would forever change how art is valued. The Gstaad auction house stood proudly in the heart of the Swiss Alps, like a majestic glass castle that seemed to touch the sky. Its massive, crystal-clear glass walls reflected the breathtaking beauty of the snow-covered mountains surrounding it. The entire building seemed to shimmer, especially under the pale, winter sun that filtered through the windows, casting soft light across the vast space. Outside, the mountains were dressed in a heavy blanket of snow, while inside, everything sparkled with luxury. As visitors stepped into the grand hall of the Gstaad auction house, they were immediately struck by its opulence. The floors were made of smooth, shiny marble that gleamed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. These chandeliers were like works of art in themselves, their shimmering crystals scattering rainbows of light across the room. Every corner of the auction house seemed designed to impress, with walls decorated with expensive art and elegant, vintage furniture that looked as if it had been chosen specifically to make the place feel even more exclusive. In this extravagant setting, the air was filled with a quiet hum, a mix of hushed voices, the soft clink of champagne glasses, and the rustling of rich fabrics. The people in the room weren't just any ordinary visitors. They were some of the wealthiest, most powerful individuals in the world, billionaires who could buy anything they wanted, aristocrats with ancient titles, and collectors whose art collections were worth more than entire countries. The sound of their voices was soft, but it carried weight. Every conversation seemed to be about making deals that could change lives, decisions worth millions. The room was buzzing with excitement, but it wasn't just the luxury that made the atmosphere electric. There was something else, a quiet tension, like a high-stakes game was being played. Every person in the room knew that the art they were about to bid on wasn't just about beauty. It was about power, wealth, influence. These were not just paintings or sculptures, they were symbols of status. The price tag didn't just reflect the worth of the work, it reflected the importance of owning it. At the very center of the room, under a soft golden spotlight, was the painting that everyone was here for. It was the crown jewel of the auction, the piece that everyone had been waiting for. Veil of Dawn was its name. The painting was large, its swirling blues and golds so vivid and alive that they seemed to change every time someone looked at it. The colors seemed to move and breathe, as if the painting was a living, breathing thing rather than just a canvas with paint on it. The way the light hit it made the gold shimmer like sunlight on water, while the blue parts of the painting seemed to capture the stillness of the night sky. The people in the room couldn't stop talking about it. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. It's going to fetch at least $25 million, some said. Maybe even more, others murmured. And yet no one knew the true story behind the painting. To the rich people gathered around it, it was just a masterpiece, a rare, expensive treasure to be fought over and owned. But the truth hidden from all eyes in that room was far more valuable than the millions they were willing to spend. The room filled with anticipation as the auctioneer Julien Moreau prepared to start the bidding. The soft murmur of conversation quieted as everyone gathered near, their eyes fixed on the canvas. They were all wondering the same thing: who would walk away with Veil of Dawn? What would it take to win it? To them, this wasn't just a painting, it was a symbol of power, of wealth, and of belonging to an exclusive club. It was about showing the world that they had the means to own the finest art in the world. In the midst of this sea of extravagant dresses, perfectly tailored tuxedos, and sparkling jewelry, there stood one woman who was completely different. Teresa Clark entered the auction house quietly, unnoticed by the crowds of rich and powerful guests. Her gown, an ivory strapless dress, was simple compared to the sparkling outfits around her. There was no logo or designer label on her dress, and it wasn't adorned with diamonds or jewels. She looked out of place, but in a way, it seemed like she didn't mind. Her face was fresh and natural, with no makeup at all, and there were no expensive accessories hanging from her neck or wrists. She moved through the room as if it didn't exist, as if the luxurious surroundings and the buzzing excitement of the auction didn't matter to her. Her hazel eyes, however, were fixed on the painting Veil of Dawn. She didn't look at it the way the collectors did, sizing it up for its value. Instead, she studied it with a calm and focused gaze, like an old friend she was meeting again. Her presence was quiet, but it drew attention in a way that was hard to ignore. The crowd barely noticed her at first, but something about the way she stood there, completely absorbed in the art, made her seem important, though no one could yet understand why. Teresa Clark stepped into the Gstaad auction house, and the world inside seemed to pause for a moment. Her arrival was unnoticed, a quiet ripple in a room full of echoes of money, power, and status. She moved through the grand entrance as if she belonged there. Yet, in her simplicity, she was a stark contrast to the glittering world around her. She wore an ivory strapless gown, soft and unadorned, with no brand name to declare its value. The fabric draped over her frame effortlessly, like a whisper in a sea of loud voices. It wasn't flashy or bold, it was delicate, much like Teresa herself. Her gown was not the kind that begged for attention, yet it had a quiet beauty, a calm elegance that could not be ignored once you truly looked at her. There were no diamonds hanging from her neck, no earrings glinting in the light. Her face was free from the heavy layers of makeup that most of the women in the room wore, yet there was something about her that seemed to shine all on its own. At 31, Teresa's beauty was understated, soft, yet powerful in its subtlety. She had a way of drawing attention without meaning to, like a quiet breeze that still manages to stir the leaves. Her presence did not demand the spotlight, but it commanded respect. Her eyes, hazel and deep with unspoken stories, held the weight of everything she had seen, stories of struggle, of resilience, and perhaps of dreams long hidden. Yet in this room where wealth and power were the only currencies that mattered, her expression remained serene. It was a look that didn't betray the fire inside her, the quiet strength that came from knowing she was not like the others in the room. She didn't need to show off or boast, her quiet confidence was enough. She walked across the gleaming marble floors, each step almost soundless, as though she was part of the air itself. The crowd, wrapped up in their own whispers and glances, barely acknowledged her presence. They were too busy eyeing the auction pieces, assessing their value in terms of wealth and prestige. But Teresa was different. She wasn't distracted by the murmurs of the room or the expensive suits that brushed by her. Her eyes were fixed on one thing, and one thing only: Veil of Dawn. The painting. An untitled masterpiece that seemed to shimmer under the soft glow of the lights, called to her in a way that nothing else could. Its swirling blues and golds reached out, almost like it was alive, as though it was waiting for her. Unlike the collectors around her, who measured its worth in dollar signs and status, Teresa saw something deeper in the work. She didn't see a price tag, she saw a story, a heartbeat in the brushstrokes. Her gaze lingered on the canvas, her eyes tracing every curve and color, as though she were greeting an old friend. There was a familiarity to it, a feeling that Veil of Dawn had been waiting for her all this time. The other guests in the room, too caught up in their own games of high society and wealth, didn't see it. But Teresa did. She could feel it, the pulse of the art, the emotion it poured out. She carried nothing but a small paddle with her name printed on it in simple, unadorned font. It was almost laughable when compared to the other bidders who carried paddles engraved with gold and diamonds. But Teresa's paddle was all she needed. She didn't need to shout her name or demand attention. Her presence was enough. She didn't need diamonds or expensive accessories to define her. She carried her worth in silence. And that was all that mattered. As Teresa stood there, a figure of calm among the chaos of wealth and ego, she was a quiet intruder in a room that had no place for someone like her. But as her gaze lingered on the painting, something shifted. For a brief moment, it felt like time had slowed, and the room around her faded away. She was no longer in the auction house filled with opulence. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere where the art was the only thing that mattered. And in that moment, she knew that Veil of Dawn was hers not because of money, but because it understood her. Teresa had barely taken a step into the room before the whispers and sidelong glances started. She was out of place in a world of diamonds, designer gowns, and tuxedos, where wealth was worn like a second skin. The eyes of the rich and powerful swept over her, but it wasn't just curiosity that marked their gaze, it was judgment. She had no diamonds or labels to signal that she belonged. She was simply there. The first to approach was Hugo Reinhardt, a German industrialist with a reputation for ruthlessness. His smirk was as sharp as his designer suit. "People like you belong in the live stream chat, not this room," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, his voice dripping with disdain. His words were met with quiet laughter, a ripple of amusement that spread like wildfire among the crowd. Teresa didn't flinch. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She simply kept her gaze fixed on Veil of Dawn, letting the colors pull her in like a magnetic force. To her, nothing else in the room mattered, not the mocking voices, not the pointed looks. Only the painting. The insults, however, didn't stop there. A French noblewoman, Baroness Celeste Yvonne, swept past her, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. She looked Teresa up and down with barely concealed contempt, her voice cutting through the air. "You're blocking my shot, darling," she said, raising her phone high, ready to snap a selfie with the painting. Teresa, unfazed, stepped aside with a graceful motion, her movements calm and dignified. Her eyes, however, never left the canvas. She wasn't going to let the world around her distract her from what truly mattered. But the mocking continued, like a storm gathering force. A group of wealthy collectors, draped in expensive fabrics and shimmering jewels, began to form a circle around her. They whispered and chuckled, their voices dripping with superiority. One woman, Ingrid Falk, a collector known for her sharp tongue, sneered at Teresa. "This isn't a thrift store gallery, dear," she said, her voice sweet but cutting, as her sapphire necklace sparkled under the chandelier lights. The insult was subtle, but no less painful. As the crowd continued their cruel game, the laughter grew louder. The comments became bolder, more personal. "What's she doing here?" one man muttered. "Is she lost?" another asked, his voice thick with mockery. Teresa stood still, the center of a cruel spectacle for the elite, their laughter echoing around her. But she did not waver. She remained composed, her expression unchanged, as though the words they hurled at her were nothing more than noise. The insults fell around her like raindrops, but she didn't flinch, didn't respond. The strength it took to hold her ground in the face of such cruelty was immense, but she did it silently, steadily. As the auction began, the attention shifted momentarily to the art itself, but the whispers about her continued. Teresa didn't react to them, though. She kept her paddle on her lap, unmoving, like a quiet sentinel in the middle of a battlefield. The weight of the crowd's scorn pressed heavily on her, but she did not let it show. Her silence was a shield. The weight of the world's judgment, the echoes of their laughter, might have broken someone else. But for Teresa, it only made her stronger. As the bids began to climb higher, her focus never wavered. She knew what she had to do, and she would do it, no matter how many rich, laughing faces surrounded her. The auctioneer, Julian Carter, stepped up to the podium, his gavel poised and his voice commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the crown jewel of this evening's event, Veil of Dawn," he announced, his tone dripping with the kind of excitement reserved for only the most valuable pieces. The crowd leaned in, their whispers buzzing like electricity through the room. As Julian began the bidding, the numbers started climbing fast. $30 million, he called out. A bidder's hand shot up immediately. $35 million. Another voice rang out from the sea of rich, eager hands. The figures kept rising, the auction now a frenzied dance of competing voices and paddles. $40 million. The crowd grew more animated, their gazes darting from one bidder to another, sizing each other up. Teresa sat still like an island in the storm, Her face was calm, serene even, in the midst of all the noise and excitement. She didn't flinch at the numbers being tossed around or at the frantic bidding from all sides. The room's pulse quickened with each increase in value, but Teresa's eyes remained steady, her gaze fixed on the painting. The frenzy of wealth around her seemed distant, as if the world of money and power no longer had a hold on her. Then, a voice broke through the tension. It wasn't one of the high-profile bidders. Instead, it was a staff member, approaching Teresa with a smirk on his face. He looked at her, his expression one of thinly veiled amusement. "Miss, this is an open seating," he said, his voice loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. "You're not on the VIP list." The room paused briefly, a ripple of awkward laughter spreading through the crowd as they turned to look at Teresa. The staffer's tone was condescending, his words clearly designed to humiliate. The laughter and whispers grew louder as people snickered under their breath. They had decided she didn't belong, that she was an intruder in their exclusive world. But Teresa, unfazed by the taunts and stares, sat silently, her dignity unshaken. She didn't respond to him or the snickering guests. She just waited. As the auctioneer's voice rang out again, announcing a new bid of $45 million, Teresa did something unexpected. She raised her paddle. The room fell silent, as if the world itself had paused for a breath. Then, a burst of laughter erupted. "Oh, look," someone called out mockingly. "The poor girl thinks she can bid." Their voices were full of derision, and more laughter followed. The comments grew louder, and the mocking glances turned into open ridicule. Some people turned to one another, making cruel jokes about Teresa's appearance and her place in the auction. But Teresa remained steady, her hand still holding the paddle high, as though she hadn't heard the laughter at all. She didn't flinch. She didn't waver. Her gaze was fixed on the auctioneer, who seemed to hesitate for a split second, unsure of what to do with her bid. The crowd continued to mock her, their voices growing more venomous by the second. Some whispered she must be dreaming, while others called her delusional. Yet, as the taunts flew, Teresa's resolve only grew stronger. She wasn't there for their approval or to play by their rules. She was there for the painting, for something much more important than any of their mockery. Her hand, though surrounded by laughter and scorn, never moved from her paddle. The laughter roared around her, but Teresa stayed calm, like a rock in the midst of a storm. Every insult, every sneer, every cruel remark only made her stand taller. The world around her was determined to make her feel small, but she was determined to stand tall and show them that their wealth and arrogance meant nothing. And in that moment, as the insults echoed in her ears and the room pulsed with derision, Teresa Clark didn't need to speak. Her silence said everything. Her hand remained steady, unwavering. Her eyes never left the auctioneer, her purpose unbroken. In the heart of the storm, she was the calm. A shocking revelation, Teresa's true identity. Just as the laughter reached its peak, Julian Carter, the auctioneer, hesitated. He leaned into his earpiece, his expression shifting from confident to visibly concerned. His face paled as he received the message, and the room instantly grew quieter, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Teresa's gaze remained fixed ahead, her body still poised as ever, but the air around her seemed to tighten with anticipation. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his usual calm demeanor shaken as he addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I've just received a private request from the artist herself. She wishes to withdraw Veil of Dawn from sale permanently." A stunned silence swept over the room. Gasps filled the air, and eyes darted from one person to the next, as if waiting for someone to explain the sudden and unexpected turn of events. The murmurs that followed were filled with confusion, disbelief, and curiosity. Then, without warning, the lights in the auction hall dimmed, and a single spotlight flicked on, bathing Teresa in soft gold. The soft murmur of the crowd died down entirely as all eyes turned toward her. With deliberate, confident steps, Teresa walked slowly to the front of the room. Her movements were measured, controlled, yet full of purpose. As she reached the podium, the laughter that had once echoed throughout the room now seemed to hang heavy in the air, replaced by a deep, palpable silence. The eyes of the room were locked on her, each person wondering who this woman was and what had just transpired. Teresa stood before the podium, her face calm but resolute. With a soft breath, she spoke, her voice steady but clear, cutting through the stunned quiet that had descended on the room. "My name is Teresa Clark," she said, her words flowing with quiet strength. "I painted Veil of Dawn. I created it in the back room of a shelter with paint I couldn't afford, on canvas donated by a retired teacher who believed in me." Her voice carried, yet it was not loud or brash. It held a quiet power that seemed to rise above the pretentious whispers and derisive laughter that had once filled the air. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle into the minds of the crowd. The people who had once mocked her, who had called her a mere spectator in this game of wealth, now had to listen. They had no choice but to hear the truth that was standing before them. "You just bid $35 million on it," she continued, her gaze steady as she looked out over the crowd. "But I've bought it back for your one." The room was frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. Teresa's words hung in the air like an invisible force, demanding recognition. The laughter that had once filled the room was gone, replaced with stunned silence. Teresa reached into the folds of her gown, pulling out the certificate of authenticity for the painting. She held it up, its edges crisp and sharp in the spotlight. With one deliberate motion, she tore the certificate in half, the sound of the paper ripping cutting through the quiet like a gunshot. The room's collective breath seemed to hold. The tearing of the certificate wasn't just an act of defiance, it was a declaration. A declaration that the value of Veil of Dawn was not tied to money, that its worth was not something that could be bought, sold, or owned. It was priceless, and the people who had mocked her, who had once seen only dollar signs, now understood the true cost of the art they so eagerly fought for. As Teresa stepped away from the podium, her gown glowing under the spotlight like a beacon, the room was swallowed by an eerie stillness. The laughter that had once filled the air had faded, replaced by an uncomfortable quiet. The wealthy elites who had mocked her, who had belittled her with every laugh, every whisper, were now nothing more than silent observers in a world they no longer understood. Their wealth, their power, their titles all meaningless in the face of Teresa's unshakable truth. Teresa's refusal to sell Veil of Dawn to those who only hung art as a status symbol, to those who flaunted their money like a weapon, was a defiant statement. It wasn't just a rejection of them, it was a statement about the true value of art, a statement that sent ripples through the art world, the likes of which had never been seen before. As Teresa walked toward the exit, her steps steady and purposeful, she carried with her a weight that no amount of money could buy. The elites who had laughed at her were now fading into the background, their once untouchable names slipping into the shadows. Their wealth, which they had so often used to define their worth, had failed to save them from the revelation of truth, Teresa's truth. The Veil of Dawn, once just a prized possession to be bought and sold, was now part of something much larger. It was no longer just a painting, it was a symbol of defiance, a symbol of art's true purpose. And it was going to remain in the place it had always belonged, with the people, with the ones who truly understood its worth. Teresa had made it clear that her 42 works would be displayed forever for free at the orphanage where she had grown up. The very place that had given her the strength to create, the strength to fight back against a world that had tried to silence her. These pieces of art, her heart, her soul, her history, would be seen by the people who truly mattered, those who would appreciate it not for its price tag, but for its emotion, for its story, for its soul. By the time the morning sun rose, the world had exploded in reaction to Teresa's revelation. Headlines screamed across newspapers, blogs, and social media, "The woman they mocked is the genius they can't afford." People who had never heard her name before were now searching for her, eager to know more about the woman who had turned the art world upside down. The photo of Teresa, standing tall under the spotlight, her eyes fierce and glowing with quiet power, had gone viral. It was shared millions of times as people marveled at her strength and courage. The images of her standing alone against the glittering crowd, her face calm but resolute, had become a symbol of something much larger than the auction itself. It was about more than just art. It was about reclaiming value, about standing up against a system that measured everything in terms of money. Teresa had shattered that system, and the world was watching. The elites who had once thought of themselves as untouchable were now humbled. Their names, which had once been associated with wealth and privilege, were now linked to the public humiliation they had inflicted on someone who was stronger than they had ever realized. Their power, once so absolute, had been revealed as a fragile illusion, built on the backs of those they had dismissed as nothing more than beneath them. In the weeks that followed, the fall of the elite became the talk of the art world. Art historians, critics, and collectors had no choice but to confront the uncomfortable truth that Teresa had laid bare. Their once prized collection seemed hollow in comparison to the authenticity and purity of her art, and the more they tried to dismiss her, the more her name grew. But Teresa didn't care about the headlines or the praise. She wasn't interested in proving anything to those who had never understood her. She was already focused on her next project, continuing to paint, continuing to teach the children at her orphanage, continuing to build a world where art was free not for the wealthy, but for everyone. And as for the elites who had mocked her, their laughter had long since died down. Their names faded like dust in the wind. Teresa Clark had shown the world that true value couldn't be bought. It had to be earned. And with every brushstroke she had earned it, not in gold, but in truth. Teresa's bold actions had ignited a firestorm that spread throughout the art world. What began as a single moment of defiance turned into a movement, a catalyst that shook the very foundation of the high-priced art market. The auction house's top bidders, those who had once flaunted their wealth with a sense of untouchable superiority, were now caught in a PR crisis of their own making. The headlines, once filled with stories of their financial triumphs, now reflected their fall from grace. Hugo Reinhardt's reputation, once synonymous with success and power, crumbled before the public eye. His firm, once one of the most influential in the art world, faced a fierce backlash. Art collectors and critics, no longer willing to align themselves with his brand of elitism, distanced themselves from him. His name was tarnished beyond repair, and the whispers about his cruel treatment of Teresa Clark became the defining narrative of his career. Celeste Vaughan, the aristocratic woman who had so publicly belittled Teresa, saw her social standing evaporate in a matter of days. Her name, once synonymous with grace and elegance, became forever linked to elitist cruelty. Her appearances at galas, which had once been high-profile affairs, were now met with cold shoulders and whispered disdain. The wealthy circles that had once adored her now turned their backs, embarrassed by the public spectacle that had unfolded at the auction. She was no longer seen as a noblewoman, but a symbol of the very system Teresa had so powerfully rejected. As for Teresa, her stand had completely reshaped the art market. Museums around the world begged for her works, offering staggering sums to add her pieces to their collections. But Teresa, unmoved by their offers, refused to sell. To her, art wasn't something to be bought or hoarded by the rich and powerful. It was meant to be shared, to be experienced by all. And so, she made the decision to keep her 42 works in the one place where they were truly valued, among the children at her orphanage. Teresa's decision resonated far beyond her own circle. Inspired by her actions, donors from all over the world came together to fund her free gallery, a place where anyone rich or poor could come and experience art without the burden of money. The gallery became a symbol of defiance, a testament to the idea that art's true purpose wasn't to serve the wealthy elite, but to challenge, to inspire, and to speak truth to power. It was a space where the value of a painting wasn't determined by its auction price, but by the emotion it stirred in those who viewed it. The elite who had once mocked Teresa now found themselves fading into obscurity. Their wealth, which they had used as a shield against those they deemed beneath them, no longer held the power it once did. They could no longer silence the truth with their money or their status. Teresa had shown the world that true value lies not in the price tag attached to an object, but in the passion, the purpose, and the meaning behind it. Teresa Clark had redefined the meaning of worth. She had created a new world of art, one that was free from the shackles of commercialism and elitism. In this new world, art was not measured in dollars, but in truth and passion. It was a world where the artist's voice was more powerful than any auction house, where the message of the work was more important than the price it could command. Teresa had not just created beautiful art, she had created a revolution. And as the world slowly turned its gaze back to her, the elites who had once ruled the art market had no choice but to watch from the sidelines. They had been overthrown not by force but by truth, and in that truth, a new era in art had begun. Teresa's journey was nothing short of a quiet rebellion against the commodification of art. In a world where wealth and status dictated the worth of everything, she stood firm in her belief that art should never be reduced to a mere price tag or a symbol of power. By rejecting the elite's view of art as something to flaunt, she reminded the world that art is not a commodity, it is a pulse. It's alive with emotion, thought, and history, meant to stir the soul and challenge the heart, not just decorate the walls of the wealthy. Veil of Dawn, once mocked for its simplicity and dismissed as too humble for the elite's collection, became a symbol of everything that art was meant to be. It was no longer just a painting, it was a legend. The colors that once seemed too basic for the high society now spoke volumes to anyone willing to listen. What was once overlooked now held a power that no amount of money could buy. And at the center of this transformation stood Teresa Clark, a woman who had been laughed at for her unassuming appearance, her quiet presence, and her refusal to play by the rules of the art world. But Teresa, in her humble way, became the voice of a new era in the art world. She showed that it wasn't wealth or status that gave art its value, but the heart, the soul, and the purpose behind it. She proved that true artistry comes from within, and it is that authenticity that speaks louder than any price tag ever could. Her story is a powerful reminder to all that the true value of art lies not in the wealth or status of those who own it, but in the heart and soul of the artist who creates it. Teresa Clark demonstrated that art isn't just something to be bought or sold. It is something to be experienced, to be felt, and to be understood on a deeper level. It is a reflection of life itself, a reflection that can't be measured in dollars, but in the emotions it evokes and the truths it uncovers. In a world that often measures worth in numbers, Teresa's stand proved that the richest treasures aren't always the ones with the highest price. Sometimes, the most valuable things are the ones that can't be bought at all. And in this new era of art, Teresa's truth is one that will continue to echo for generations to come. If Teresa's story moved you, take a moment to show your support. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How has Teresa's journey changed your view on art and value? And don't forget to share this with others who need to hear this incredible story. Let's spread the truth about art's true worth together.